can approach her anytime you want because we are not really on time. So the next one's gonna be a very interesting topic. It couldn't get more straight than that, like how to fuck up your console launch before you even start porting. And for that we will have the CEO of Dreamloop Games. Please welcome with me Joni Lappalainen.
Hi. Good. First and foremost, welcome in. You've been clickbaited by the title. Good job. Now, I've been doing this talk a couple of times now, and I always have to start with the fact that this is the most kind of like provocative and clickbaity title that I ever done. But what we're going to be focusing here is, as a developer, what are the most likeliest areas that you don't pay attention to as a developer or as a publisher for the game project that you want to take on consoles. Because taking stuff to consoles is a completely different thing than launching them on Steam. Now, to start things off with, a little bit about myself. So I've been over 10 years in the industry now, done over 40 projects as a producer. I'm the co-founder of Dreamloop, that is going to be 10 years soon. And I'm also the chairperson of the Finnish Game Developers Association and many other organizations in Finland. And just like Sophie earlier said, for me as well, it's the industry in Finland and the people in Finland that are really important to me, but also the products that I get to work with. Because there's a lot of our own IP, but there's a lot of also other people's games that I've been working on. And you can see some of them here, for example, The Ascent, Gorekeeper, Rekka, doing something for Netflix with Shadow and Bone, Mandalay Slayers of Fear, and so many others. But also, I'm on observation duty, Stardust Galaxy Warriors Inescapable, also games that have been our own, or collaborations when talking, for example, I'm on observation duty. But to get to the point, yeah, your game is fucked. Now, there's a nice little quote that my co-founder and I like to talk about, which goes, that is my principal objection to life, I think. It's too easy when alive to make a perfectly horrible mistakes. And I think this kind of like puts it really nicely what happens when you're doing game development, especially when you want to take your game then from PC to consoles. So why this topic is important is that unknown unknowns, that's where your project will, go south. If you don't know what you don't know, it will surprise you when it comes around the corner. Death by 1,000 cuts. There's so many edge cases that you did not know about, or even if you knew about, you did not prepare for them when you start to go on consoles, especially if you go all the consoles after your Steam launch. And when you start to have a lot of problems, your timeline starts to go longer, you need to put more resources, and eventually things are going to be way more expensive than you hope that they will be. And then there's the last thing is like there's a lot of consoles. Well, technically there's 3 major ones. 2 of those have still 2 generations that are being played on. For example, PlayStation 4 still it covers almost 40% of the playing time on PlayStation. So PlayStation 5 is only around 60% of the player base. And a lot of that, depending on what consoles you decide to target, is also usually a business plan, not a tech, not a plan for your tech team to make. Now, the typical pitfalls are in performance optimization, especially if you're going to go for the handheld device, that shall not be named. Input and method controls, depending on your game. If you do 4x strategy, well, doing that on a controller compared to mouse and keyboard is a little bit different thing. User interface is another thing. Is even for games that you usually think that this, my third kind of the third camera the third-person camera will nicely turn into a controller, but what about your UI? Will that nicely turn into a controller if you need to be drag and dropping a lot of stuff in your UI? Most likely not. Then there's the whole thing about certification and compliance. Anyone can put anything on Steam, literally anything. I've seen some of the titles. But when you start to be putting stuff on consoles, there's a lot of requirements and compliances that you need to meet in order to get your game on that walled garden. Then, of course, there are going to be content licensing and restrictions that you don't have when you're publishing on Steam. And one big thing is networking and online services. And this opens a whole other can of worms when you're moving from Steam, especially if you used all the Steam platforms methods to handle your networking. Because no, you cannot use any of that when you go to consoles. And with that, there's a couple of empty ones there, huh? So just how effed up it is. We're gonna call it, it's 1 FPS, 1 frame per second effed up. Now I wanna share you a little story that happened, not to us, but to a studio that we know and we talk relatively often. We saw a case where the developer had an excellent game, a solid demo, a lot of wishlists. We're talking about 6-digit wishlists that looked and played really, really well on a high-end PC hardware. Even the most best consoles at time, the first playable was running 1 frame per second. At best, we're rounding it up. Most of the time it was just like a projector dia show. But why, you might ask? I mean, it was only one blueprint, that was the problem. The only one blueprint that Unreal Engine project had, which handled all the logic of the game. Now, PC somehow can handle that, especially when there's a lot of power on the hardware. Consoles, they don't take that. And now I'm gonna run you guys through some of the cases. I'm not gonna go into a lot of detail. This here is gonna be a short topic, and it's gonna be focusing on the fact that you will now know that there's gonna be problems with your project, and it's good to get someone to look under the hood before you decide to go and start porting. The first area is asset management. So none of your target platforms outside of PC are PC. They're not as good and performant as your development PC is. They're still computers, even though some feel like toasters, but it will never be as performant as whatever is the PC that you're making the game with. So you need to be mindful of how you load and unload assets, because again, you're not going to have the performance of your development or testing PC. When you're working on consoles, the loading cannot stop the movement of screen. Again, on Steam, yeah, users don't like it, but Steam is not telling you that no, you cannot launch your game because you have a problem like that. Consoles will. Loading screens are, of course, always a good way to deal with this problem, if you had that designed in your game. But if you're just running through the field and then you hit the loading screen saying like, hey, yeah, we gotta load the rest of this level, so just sit on tight for 20 seconds, it's not exactly gonna fly really nicely. This is one of the pain points that I see with a lot of indie devs. Direct references are easy to use, and you get a lot of results real fast. Later on, in order to have one door in a game, you need to load in like 90% of the game, because you use direct references, which uses direct references, which use direct references, and suddenly you cannot chunk the game. And that becomes a problem. So you made a patch, but because of that one door that had direct references and so forth, you need to patch 9 gigs for when you want to change the animation of that door. So the problem is, if you don't patch your game, if you don't chunk your game, you have a lot of problem with patching and updating, especially as not all console platforms give you infinite amount of space that you can patch. Some of them actually limit your lifetime patching sizes. And then there's the whole ready-to-play chunk. You are not allowed to tell the player like, hey, you need to download the whole 60 gigs and then you can start playing. No, the consoles will demand you that you allow them to play already when part of the game has been downloaded. Now, custom render pipelines. This is a fun learning for a lot of studios, because your custom render pipelines don't inherently work on consoles. Because while you're making your custom render pipeline, who's gonna making the so that it's compatible for consoles? No one. You gotta make it compatible yourself. And of course, there's a lot of stuff that you can see if you expect that your custom render pipeline would work on consoles. But in reality, if you have a custom render pipeline, you better be prepared that you need to put in the work also then to create the compatibility yourself. So I always suggest stick to the built-in solutions of the engines when you want to go on consoles, or then be prepared to have the time to make the compatible. So every time that you work with built-in solutions, you're freeing up time. You're freeing up your resources. And in the end, you can always use your resources to have a really cool launch party if you don't want to spend on anything else. Now, regarding plugins, building your game around a critical plugin that you find that doesn't work on consoles is like baking a cake to your friend, a chocolate cake, for their birthday, to realize that they're allergic to chocolate and cake. The problem is, if your plugin does not work on a console that you're targeting, you gotta choose. Will you make it work on the said console? Will you do the code work? Will you drop the plugin? I mean, if it was already a critical plugin for you, what are you gonna replace it with? Or will you just drop the console platform that it doesn't work on? And again, you're making yourself either take hit on your resourcing or hit on the sales that you're going to make. Next, consoles and modding support. No. 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 Don't expect that you can do modding on consoles without a lot of work. Not only work on your own team, but also work with the platform owner. Now, regarding controller and UI, like I said earlier, it's not only gameplay control, but it's also the UI, how you handle that with the controller. Handheld consoles have a really small screen. You cannot really expect the experience to be same on that device as it's on the TV, even though they can upscale to a TV. Player names need to be shown on multiplayer titles. Again, Steam don't have any restrictions on what you need to do. But on consoles, that needs to be a case. So if you planned without this, and then you need to put this on, it might harm the player experience in terms of the character placements and what they need to be seen, and so forth, and it might cause a lot of problems. There's also the whole thing about that on consoles, there's certain technical terminology that needs to be followed to the letter. You cannot say, let me think of something. On certain consoles, you cannot even say controller. That is not a technical word that they accept. Instead, they will have a certain terminology for that, which needs to also be localized for any of the languages that you're going to go for, and it cannot be wrong from that language either. So there's going to be a lot of the technical terminology that you need to be implementing into your UI, and it needs to be reactive correctly to all the languages that you do. And it needs to be different for all the different consoles. Now, I will finish this off with going through some timeline killers. First and foremost, save and load or achievement systems without using a manager system in between. It's going to be a problem because you had built your save and load directly to use Steam system, or your achievement to use directly Steam systems. What about when you need to use another system? You need to rebuild the code, make changes on how you access it, etc. Always have manager systems for your save, load, and achievements if you want to go on consoles. Age ratings. Steam don't give an F about age ratings. Consoles care a lot. Now, if you go digital, it's easy. It's 2 weeks, hacking a lot of paperwork, but it's 2 weeks. If you go physical, you need to start sending over CDs over Europe and US and Asia if you're going there. So age ratings is going to be actually a couple of months of work to get to if you want to do a physical release for your game. Ongoing game development is one thing that very often is overlooked by publishers especially. If the game is not ready and you start to work on a port, when something changes in the game, weeks of porting work on, for example, optimization can be lost. So ongoing game development is possible during porting, but if you have that, make sure that it is well organized, your producers are on top of their game, and change logs become your Bible. Port packaging. Mentioned already about the assets a lot, but it also affects on your build times. The longer your team needs to spend time building, the less time they're spending on developing. Custom engines with Unreal Engine is a good way to have your own custom things in, but again, when you do something custom, it's not having directly a implementation on consoles. You need to work that all yourself. And this kind of things are what can be called by the death of 1,000 cuts. Sure, one problem, all the projects have one problem, all the projects have 2 problems, but when you start to have like hundreds of these, your timeline is not looking what you thought it was, your release time is not looking like you thought it was, and definitely your team was not prepared for what was coming up. With that, thank you, and if you have any questions about porting related stuff, I think we have like a couple of minutes before the next speakers. Any questions? Do we have, I would assume most of you are developers here. So anything of this sounded like something that you might have done wrong?
I haven't done any console yet, but I'm less motivated to do so now. No, but I think it's really good to notice pitfalls, and yeah, it's a very good overview. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point of like, you should feel unmotivated to go to consoles, because then you have the right mindset of just like how harder it's gonna be as a platform compared to anything on PC. Not to demotivate you from having a lot of money from a lot of players who don't play on PC, but the fact is that when you make the game for Steam, you spend 90% and 90% of your time and resources on the game. When you go to consoles, you're using 5% to your game and 95% on making it run on the platform's requirements. Okay?
I don't have a question, but I would like to also add my 2 cents into this. If the game has any in-apps, for example, consoles would require a few months' notice if you would like to change something into that, and it's such a pain. Because you can't just decide, okay, we're going to discontinue this in-app or introduce a new one. No.
Yeah, the consoles have a lot of say and control on the things that you want to do with your own game, because they will always prioritize their platform's integrity and experience for players over the experience of your game. So they will be requiring a lot of you, and I could tell a lot of stories which unfortunately are restricted by NDAs with the said platforms on some of the things that might or might not be very developer friendly. That's for me. Thank you.